Which coaches do the Dallas Cowboys absolutely have to keep in 2025? We'll break it down on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the Dallas Cowboys coaching staff, which we still really don't know much. Landon, all we know is that the Cowboys denied the Bears access to interview Mike McCarthy. We know that the contracts of a lot of the assistant coaches are up, so they can go negotiate with other teams. So what we thought is today we're going to talk about which coaches would we like to see the Cowboys bring back and which coaches should they move on from. But before we do that, don't you get the sense that the longer this thing kind of goes on, the more likely it is that McCarthy's coming back?
Yeah. I think that the stance right now is the first option is to bring McCarthy back on a deal that I think, satisfies certain criteria that they're looking for. I'm not 100% sure what the criteria is. Some of it might be money. Some of it might be, the play calling aspect or I heard somebody really smartly phrase it like asking Mike McCarthy, hey, what's going to be different, this time when we do a signing, because we want to see what we want to break through. We need to break through. And that's, I think, a legitimate question. So I do think the longer we go on here, the more it feels like that is the case, that both parties, and I think that's the other thing that we need to mention too, is that it feels like in publicly people are talking about the situation and that it seems like a contentious situation. I think, they're talking about leverage on one side or the other. I think both sides really want this deal, and I think they may not have the exact same situation in mind that's where they're going to negotiate. But I think, for better or for worse for us, right? I think the Cowboys front office and Mike McCarthy, are still a match as far as what they want in this situation.
So you're telling me that the Cowboys handle their head coaching contracts the same way they do the quarterback and wide receiver contracts? Is that right?
Yeah,
delay it as long as possible.
Yeah, it'll get done, but certainly at a costly expense and on their own timeline, right?
That's true. All right, let's talk about the coaches that we think the Cowboys have to hold on to almost no matter what, no matter which coach or head coach is here. Are there any guys for you that you feel like the Cowboys can't afford to lose?
I think you and I have a very similar list, so I'm going to start with the guy that I know is at least on my list, and I'm assuming is on yours, and that's Lindell Wells, right? Yeah. I think that he, to me, is of these guys that are the assistants. And look, we're going to have a whole conversation about the defense. Like, I think a lot of what the defense is going to happen is going to be, hinging on what happens at the defensive coordinator spot. But I think no matter what happens, if new head coach, new offensive coordinator, whatever, the Cowboys should try to find a way to retain Lindell Wells. I think he's just been such a fantastic coach for the Cowboys. And I think, look, the tight ends, Ferguson specifically seemingly took a kind of a step back this year, but I think we've also seen improvement in Luke Schoonmaker and seen some of the younger guys continue to get play and start to step up a little bit. And that has been a continuous thing, right? So to me, that's a sign of a good coach. And I'll even go this far. We'll talk about Mike Solari, I'm sure, at some point in this podcast. I wouldn't be upset if they decided to even change Lindell Wells' job title from tight ends coach to offensive line coach, because I know that is something he has experience in. He was a good offensive line coach. I think he's a good coach. I think the Cowboys need to find a way to retain him.
Yeah, Lindell Wells was actually a offensive lineman in the Arena Football League way back in like the early 2000s. And then he was a offensive line coach and a run game coordinator in college for a while. And then when he went to the Giants, That's when he's kind of transitioned over
Yeah.
to being a tight end coach. And then with Dallas, he's basically been only a tight end coach. He's been really good, whether it's developing Dalton Schultz, Jake Ferguson, or having any of these guys step up and be ready to go. I just don't think you're going to find guys out there that are going to make the most of whatever talent they've had in the room. And it's not like the Cowboys have spent a bunch of high picks on the tight end spot. Like Dalton Schultz was a 4th-round pick. Jake Ferguson was a 4th-round pick. Schoonmaker was a 2nd-round pick. And yet they've got some really good production out of the room. I think he is somebody they have to hold on to.
Sean McEwen, when he was here, was giving you good production. Brevin Spade forward and was an undrafted free agent and played very well as a rookie tight end, just under that context. So, yeah, I think he's done a really good job of consistently developing young guys and with very few misses. I think he's a guy that you should retain in some form or another.
I would put Mike Zimmer on this list, but I don't really think that's up to the Cowboys here.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
I think that's up to whether Zim wants to coach or not. So everybody else on the defensive side of the ball, is really hard to say whether or not you want to keep them depending on what Zim is here, which leads me to special teams. John Fossil. I think Bones is somebody that I want to keep. I understand why there are some people in the Cowboys media or Twitter that get a little frustrated with him. But Landon, you look over like the last 3 years, like Brett Maher had an awesome season before he fell apart in the playoffs, but like an actually awesome year. The Cowboys had major kicking concerns going into 2023. They get Brandon Aubrey, who has missed like 3 kicks over that 2-year span, has been one of the most lethal kickers in all of the NFL. And you have an all-pro kick returner that you just found out of nowhere in Kevontae Turpin. I don't know what else you want here.
I mean, he's been really great at finding players. He's been really great at designing scheme. He was the one who was kind of leading the charge in this kickoff rule. And I think, whether you like the kickoff rule or not, I think the point is that he is a leader in the community, special teams coaches community.
Yeah.
Like he is someone that is looked to by and respected by a lot of other special teams coaches. I mean, look, I love the idea. I mean, I'm old school, right? I remember Joe Avezzano, right? I love the idea of like having a special teams coach that sticks with you through a long time. I think that there's value in that. And I especially think there's value in having a special teams coach who likes special teams, like who like is actually doesn't aspire to be necessarily something else. I don't know. Maybe Bones does aspire to be a head coach someday like his dad. I'm not sure. But I know that like he loves being a special teams coach and certainly isn't like going out and trying to find other gigs. Yeah. So I love his enthusiasm. Every single time he talks about special teams, I get excited to listen to him talk about it. And I just think that when you have enthusiasm about something as opposed to like it's a job you're trying to escape, I just think you do a better job. And I think that plays out. Yes, there are times when he maybe calls a fake punt too many, or this or this,
too aggressive, trying to block a punt, right?
Fair. There are definitely those times, but there are also times when he designs an onside kick that wins the game for you, or like has a trick play and special teams, or has broken down film in such a way that you understand that there's a weakness in their kick block, in their field goal kick team. And, we found out how to attack the right blocker and get home. So
I look at 2023 week 1. One of the first things that Bones did is he found a weak spot in the Giants field goal unit. They blocked a kick, returned it for a touchdown. That game was over instantly because of special teams.
Yep, exactly. Think about the Atlanta game, right? The watermelon kick. And, just there's so many different times when, strategy that Bones has employed has helped us, has won games at times, So yeah, to me, I think Bones Fossil is a guy that I desperately would like to come back, even no matter who the head coach or defensive coordinator is. I'd find a way to keep him.
And I remember there was a stretch before Bones, and it was from like 2011 to 2018, where the Cowboys had 0. I think it was 1 kickoff return for a touchdown during that stretch, and I think it was Ryan Switzer that did it. And now it seems like we get 3 every single year. I think the Cowboys had 3 or 4 kick returns for a touchdown just this year. Turpin had a punt return for a touchdown. So he does a really good job of creating splash plays, explosive plays. They've blocked more punts than ever. Now, some of it's just been bad luck, but I do think he gives you an advantage every single week on special teams. And I just don't know if you let him go, regardless of who's your head coach, if you're going to be able to find anybody in his caliber or in his range of coach.
Totally agree. Again, I think special teams coach is not something that necessarily, and just to kind of a little bit more insight, he's the guy who is the not running practice, but managing practice for Mike McCarthy. Like he's the one who's constantly setting the downs and distances when they're going through, 7-on-7s and 11-on-11s. He's the voice you hear when they're announcing the drills and all that stuff. So he has a really big role on this team, not even just in special teams, but outside of that as well. I think he's a key part of this team that they need to keep.
All right, let's talk about some coaches that we're kind of on the fence with. We could go either way. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories was going to a comedy show last year with my wife. The energy and the excitement was unforgettable. Now, Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Like if I want to go to the Denver Buffalo game this weekend, I can jump on the app, see what my seats are going to look like before I even get there. Plus, you'll see the all-in pricing, so you're not surprised at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're discussing the Dallas Cowboys coaching staff. Landon, let's talk about some coaches that we're on the fence with. Who are some guys where you haven't decided whether they should hold on to them or get rid of them?
Yeah, again, it's kind of hard to do the defensive guys a little bit without knowing exactly what the status of your defensive coordinator is. So I'm picking another offensive guy. I'm picking Robert Prince. I think when he originally got hired as the wide receivers coach for the Cowboys, I think he came from Boise State, if I'm not mistaken. He had some history, with some wide receivers that we had dealt with before. Obviously, Cedric Wilson was a guy that was from Boise State. So, there was some interest there. And I think, kind of watching what we've seen from Jalen Tolbert at kind of just up and down at different points and showing out in training camp, but kind of failing to always kind of transition that to the regular season. And then, I think on a positive side, though, like seeing what he's been able to do with Turpin, right? And kind of develop Turpin a little bit more as a wide receiver, certainly more than I expected from a guy that seemed at the time when we got him to be just mostly a special teams type player. But again, like you also add in other guys, like they got Mingo. I know that they only had Mingo, through half the season, but it just doesn't feel like that there's been a bunch of effect from the wide receiver coach, right? It just feels like the position is very flat. We haven't had a ton of development necessarily. I mean, the talent is obviously CeeDee Lamb, and I don't know that Prince had a huge hand in kind of developing that. And outside of that, you've got Brandon Cooks, who's a veteran, obviously came in fully formed. So what has he done with some of these down roster wide receivers? Where I mean, especially now, I feel like you really need development down there. I just don't know that he's done enough to make me feel like he can't be replaced with someone who might be able to develop young guys a little bit better.
And I'm going to add in Al Harris. And I know there's a lot of Cowboy fans out there that are really worried about losing Al Harris. And I get it. Like DeRon Bland's development has been fantastic. Jordan Lewis is playing some of the best football of his career. But the rest of the defensive backs, I think Diggs has taken a step back over the last 2 years. Now, a lot of that has been injury related. I feel like the safeties were not as good this year as they were in previous seasons, right?
Maybe, yeah.
And I don't know how he's going to mesh or gel with a new defensive coordinator, right? Like if you get a new defensive coordinator that wants to run an entirely new scheme and different coverages and stuff, maybe Al Harris isn't a fit. I like Al Harris. It seems like the players really like him, but he's one, I think it very much depends on who is running your defense.
Well, I think that there was a legitimate question when Mike Zimmer got hired, how much of a fit Al Harris was for Zimmer's kind of defense, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I like a lot what he's done. I think you mentioned a lot of the very positive stuff that he's been had a hand in. But I also wonder if his job hasn't expanded a little bit too much for him, right? I think
Maybe.
the thing that he is really good at is dealing with players one-on-one, having the experience of being a player. He relates to these guys a lot. He understands being a cornerback's scary, man. Like, you have to play with your back to the quarterback. A lot of times you got to trust your technique. Even when you're beat and it seems like things are bad, you've got to teach guys to trust their technique and trust their instincts. That's not an easy thing to do. And it takes somebody who has the kind of experience, I think, to kind of impart that wisdom on younger players. I think that there's value in that, but I also worry that he's become so good at that, he's now getting promoted out of his skill set, right?
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Because it's a lot like the conversation we had last year when we were discussing defensive coordinators and Al Harris's name came up. It's like, at a certain point, he needs to start developing an X's and O's prowess. Like, he needs to be either a play caller somewhere, right, or start kind of developing that skill a little bit, because otherwise he doesn't necessarily have any kind of history there. So
you're basically calling it the Peter principle, right? Where an employee works so well at the
Peterman
lower
principle,
level.
yes.
Yeah. And then you get to a certain level where you're just not good at your job anymore, so you have to go back down. I do wonder that with Al Harris, I wouldn't be surprised if he continues to level up and get better as he gets more experience. But I don't necessarily think he's somebody that, like, if he gets a defensive coordinator job this offseason and the Cowboys lose him, I'm not going to be up in arms about it, because there's just no way that you can justify that yet.
I think he's gotten to the point where the rest of the development he needs to have to get to being a defensive coordinator, I think he probably needs to go someplace else to do, right?
Probably.
He needs to either go to the college level or something. I think it's tough to just be a first time ever defensive play caller in the NFL.
Yeah,
that's really
tough. One more here, and this one's hard. Our guy John Oning, cover your ears. Mike Solari, I'm on the fence with, and here's why. I think he's done a really good job of getting backup offensive linemen to at least play at an acceptable level, right? Like, there have been times this year where you've got TJ Bass coming in cold off the bench, having to play in big games. Chuma Udoga coming off a major injury, playing left tackle. Tyler Guyton switching from right tackle to left tackle, playing against Myles Garrett in week 1. And I don't think the offensive line has gotten them killed in most of these games. But it's also not like he's Bill Callahan or, Mike Munchak, where he's necessarily adding value to your offensive line. And that's where I struggle with him.
You ready for this take? Solari is the Mike McCarthy of these other coaches.
I kind of feel
like
the same
where
thing, yeah.
It's like I think he's really good at developing a nice soft floor for these guys. Like, somehow, despite all the injuries and everything that was going wrong, and playing all these rookies and people that don't have any experience, it is kind of crazy how we were able to kind of continually get positive performances from a number of these guys. Now, what's crazy to me is that you're getting really unexpectedly positive performances from your young guys, but you're getting like less than expected positive performances from your veterans, right? Like Zach Martin didn't play very well necessarily under Solari. Obviously, a lot of that is injury related and age related, but we saw what Terrence Steele struggled with early in the season. I think part of that, as Duke Meriwether has pointed out, that that could be a technique situation, right? Like, I think Solari is trying to get them to throw their outside hands first, and I think that's been causing some issues with Steele. But at the same time, I think Steele, these last 7 games, I saw somebody tweet, it might have been John himself actually, that tweeted out that the last, or was it you, that the last 7 games that he's only given up something like 1 sack and 6 pressures or something. Yeah. So I do think that there's been improvement there, certainly, but the problem here is the same with the problem with Mike McCarthy. This is too important a position to just be good enough, right? Like, if you want to be great, look at all you want to actually be good. Look at all the teams that are kind of elite right now. They have very, very good offensive line coaches. It would be the Stoutland being obviously the best example right now with the Eagles. If the Cowboys were serious about getting better, and I tweeted this the other day, if they actually really wanted to get better, you said the name, go take that money and pull, Mike Munchak is consulting right now for the LA Rams. I'm pretty sure he's just doing it during training camp as well. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think he's living in Denver right now. But yeah, I mean, I think he's working from his home consulting. Yeah.
Go dump a bunch of money to get Mike interested in living in Dallas for 3 years, right? Like, let's upgrade. That is a position that if you could find a rock star coach and you could get him to like commit to like being on your team long term, that Stoutland. I mean, I can't ever remember how to pronounce his name, but the New England coach that was there forever and ever.
Dante Scarnecchia. Yeah,
Scarnecchia. Like, if you could find a way to like get one of these, upper echelon guys, pay them tons of money, who cares, and then keep them for long periods of time. That is the best way to create stability in your team. At simply just adding an assistant coach. It's a low cost relatively way to really, really kind of stabilize a franchise for multiple seasons.
I just don't know who that option is out there, because most of these guys aren't leaving their respective teams. But like, if Nick Sirianni loses in round 1 to the Packers, maybe they just clean house in Philadelphia. Then we go out and get salad. Probably not. Let's talk about some coaches that absolutely need to go this offseason. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. I'm really looking forward to Wildcard Weekend. We've got some awesome games starting on Saturday with the Chargers and the Texans, and we've got Ravens and Steelers on Saturday night. Taking a look at Pittsburgh plus 400 on the money line there. Kind of like that. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Lena, there aren't a lot of names here that I think the Cowboys have to get rid of, but is there one or two that sticks out to you?
There is, and I'm going to caveat this a little bit. This person needs to go, not necessarily because of the performance that they have put out, but because of other things. And that, to me, is Brian Schottenheimer. Because
that was my name.
You need an offensive coordinator. Like, you need a real offensive coordinator, someone to call plays. And I know that Brian Schottenheimer can do that, but I'm saying that the Cowboys, if they're going to bring McCarthy back, I think that one of the things that they are probably going to be talking to him about is, hey, would you accept another play caller if we wanted to go out and get another play caller? Because I do think that, especially, look, we've talked about the death by 1,000 cuts early in the season. I think the one thing that you can say that, wasn't affected by injury or circumstance that was bad was the offensive play calling early in the season. And there really is no excuse for it. And, I understand that, performance execution was obviously a big part of it. It's hard to call plays with 2 rookie offensive linemen. All of that is, legitimate. At the same time, you were the head coach. You put yourself, the play caller, into that position. So for me, I think the most important thing, the most important way that this team can improve this offseason, in my opinion, is getting a new and different play caller in here, changing things up. And just kind of pumping in some new blood into that situation. I understand that Mike McCarthy provides a nice floor for that situation as well. But I think it's time to get rid of the kind of offensive coordinator in name only, Brian Schottenheimer. let him go play somewhere. It sounds like he wants to do that too.
Which, and just to be clear, we actually think that Schottenheimer is a pretty decent OC. He doesn't need to go because of performance, as you mentioned. I just think
what
they
he's
need
done
a change.
is good. Like what his actual job has done is good. But
he's fine. I just think they need to get maybe a little bit younger there. I've been making my plea that I want a play caller who wears skinny jeans where I can see their ankles, has an iPhone 16, and has a Blue Sky account. Like all that kind of stuff. Like some young millennial that plays 1,000 hours of Madden every year. I want running my offense. I don't think it's Scott Tolzien, who is the quarterback coach, because he's never called plays before. Maybe that is something that they inch towards if McCarthy does come back. But I would like to see them maybe bring in somebody who is more used to running motion and more used to some different passing concepts. I would also like to see an offensive coordinator that can help design a run game, because I've been kind of less than thrilled with the rushing style and attack that McCarthy and Schottenheimer have had over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, look, this also kind of goes back to the Blasco thing, right? Like, it feels like the run game was something that the Cowboys needed to be able to rely on early in this season, and something that they wanted to rely on throughout. And whether that's the offensive line, it's hard to kind of parse that. Whether that's the offensive line or the run game design itself, it's hard to say. But I do think that, it's easy to kind of lump it into the larger play calling issues that you've seen with the offensive coordinator. So, yeah, I agree. Like, I just think that it would be great to get somebody from the Shanahan tree here, right? I know it seems routine and everybody's going there, but like just to kind of get some of those run game elements involved would just be, I think, really beneficial, especially since this team already has such a West Coast feel to it. I think it would fit in quite nicely there.
All the other coaches, some of them we just don't really know because we're not behind the scenes how much they do with their impact. And again, a lot of it's going to depend on who your coordinators are. If you bring in, I'm just going to make up a name. You bring in Robert Saleh to run his defense. He's probably going to clean house and bring in all of his guys, a lot of the guys from the Jets or the 49ers. Same with the offensive coordinator. If you bring in a veteran offensive coordinator, they're going to want a lot of their guys running the offensive line or running the wide receiver room. So we just focused on some of the big name coaches, but I think that's at least a pretty good cheat sheet of names to kind of follow over the next week while these coaches look for new jobs.
Yeah, and just to throw one more name out there, I think Paul Gunther is an interesting name, right? Because of who it would be brought into Zimmer. Is this a guy that could potentially be the defensive coordinator to kind of just take over very easily if Zimmer decides to retire or pull back? He's a name, just if you don't know, to kind of get familiar with, who was Zimmer's top lieutenant. It'll be interesting to see. Obviously, if Zimmer goes, there's a high chance he leaves, but maybe he doesn't. Maybe he decides he wants to take a step up and take the job.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Check out the channel on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.